Maiyegun General,
Hello there.
Maiyegun
We are back at it again, and please, if you are joining me this morning or afternoon or evening, please share the broadcast. Invite your friends, invite your not so friendly friends, and tell them we're about to start again. Oh yeah, okay, we can work something out, Baba. You need to go and join the Telegram of the Yoruba Union. Somebody want to link up with Awolowo. Join Yoruba Union at this, and then you'll be able to get in touch with him. That's the closest. Thank you so much, everyone. We are back to the reading. We are almost done, by the way, and we are starting early today, so we're almost done. I don't think we have up to 100 pages anymore. No, we don't have up to that. So we are starting early today. And from what we had the last time, for those of you who have been following, right, please share this. And if you have not been following, this is us continuing from chapter 8 of A Fatherless People, the secret story of how the Nigerians missed the road to the promised land. So, without wasting any much of our time, I think we should get down to it. This is post-independence. This was after they have finally orchestrated the, the northern elites, the northern oligarchy, to take over power in Nigeria, even when they did not want to. So all of this, the machination of the British, again, for those of us who are listening or who have been following, the purpose of us reviewing or reading this book and the history, who we were before we were forced to be Nigeria. Your time, all the dedicated time listening, from the time when we started to now, I will continue to urge you. Reading this book is not to reignite whatever hatred, whatever division, whatever things that a lot of you have sort of harbored for so long. This is not an effort to bring them back to life. It is for you to understand them. And at the same time, understand who you are, respect who you are. And in that regard, you will respect others for who they are too. And this is the understanding this history is meant to bring. This is not, you see, hating one another or reigniting or revalidating why you hated this or that tribe. It's never going to help you. In fact, hating the British because of this history is also not going to help us. The fact that we can understand better simply means it will be very foolish of us to continue to enforce a creation that is totally false. That's the purpose of reading this book. Understanding who we are and stop the identity crisis. How did you come to become Rivers, Ogun? How did you become Sokoto? And how did you become Delta? All this creation and the purpose behind them is why we are reading this book. So that we will know better. And as you know better, you are expected to do better. In my own opinion. So we will continue now. The last page we were was page 234. So this was after Balewa had been installed as the prime minister, and the whole effort of stopping Awolowo from establishing a coalition with Azikiwe that could have possibly changed the trajectory of Nigeria today. So all of this are, stuff we've covered already. So let's continue. So I will start from where Awolowo's efforts were acknowledged. So meanwhile, give me 1 sec, just for us to be very sure that you can all hear me loud and clear. Let's continue. Awolowo's efforts to build an alliance with the East were doomed to failure because the North, with the support of the British Colonial Office, had its own strategies to ensure that that alliance would never happen. So from that moment onward, to close that part, here is the last chapter, I mean the last paragraph. What followed over the 10 years following independence was determined action to neutralize the threat to northern rule by the use of the army, spawning the Western region political crisis of 1962 and the military occupation of the region, the Treason trial of 1963, leading to the imprisonment of the main political actors in the Southwest, the uprising in the TV division, leading to the military occupation of that area from 1964, the political crisis in the Western region in 1965, leading to a virtual civil war in that region, the first military coup in January 1966, the military counter-coup of July 1966, and the Biafran War of 1967, leading to the military conquest of Biafra in January 1970, the 1962 Western region crisis. Balewa's appeal for national unity was an easy one for him to make. It was in reality the offer of a poisoned chalice. For Awolowo, it posed a dilemma. If the action group rejected the hand that the NPC was offering, it would be labeled unpatriotic. If it accepted it, its message for future electoral contests against the NPC would be compromised. The problem, as Awolowo saw it, was not going into an alliance for the sake of national unity per se, but going into an alliance with the NPC. Awolowo wrote, "When I delivered my lecture in London, one of the students asked me whether I could work under Balewa. And I said, I could not, because both of us do not operate on the same wavelength. I opposed the participation of my party in a national government because I felt that such participation would mean the disappearance of the opposition, which in the view of Democrats is the soul of democracy. I will not take office under Balewa at any time. If the prime minister had been Dr. Azikiwe, I would gladly work under him. I will not work under the Sadauno. He is the fountain of authoritarian rule in the north and of oppression in Nigeria," Awolowo said in one of his lectures in London. The problem for Awolowo was that there were some within his party who were keen not to miss out on this first opportunity to taste power. There was also the thinking There was also the thinking that if action group members joined the national government, they would have the opportunity to build closer relationships with the NCNC and woo them from within. The compromise between opportunity and principle, which Awolowo thought he had, and Ayorosiji, the then federal secretary, which Awolowo thought he had found rather, was to put forward Samuel Akintola, the then deputy leader of the action group, and Ayorosiji, the then federal secretary to the party, to join the Balewa-led coalition government, whereupon they became federal ministers. It proved a fatal move, as the NPC was now presented with an opportunity to groom these action group members of the national coalition government to open up the divide between Awolowo's camp and Akintola and his followers. Enahoro explained the divide as follows. Ever since Independence Day, debates had raged within the party over the future of the Western region and of the party. Some members wanted the action group to join an all-party coalition government at the center. Others suggested that the Western region should secede from the federation. Some that the party should seek accord with the NCNC, others with the NPC. In the end, two schools of thought predominated. The one led by Chiefs Akintola and Rusiji leaned towards the NPC and desired to join a national coalition at any cost. And the other, led by Chief Awolowo and myself, Enahoro, preferred the NCNC and suggested what became known as a progressive front, comprising the NCNC, Action Group, NEPU, NEPU, and UMBC. As the crisis within the party grew, attempts were made to reconcile the irreconciliables, but deeper currents were at work, as Awolowo himself put it. Chief Akintola's chief complaint at the meeting for settlement in February 1962 was that I made unfavorable reference to the advisability of the action group participating in the national government. I never wanted national government because I felt it would spell the doom of the opposition and consequently of parliamentary democracy. In order, however, to please the Obas and Chief Akintola and those who shared his views, I interviewed the Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar, on the 6th of April, 1962, to discuss with him the possibility of the action group participating in the national government. Up till that day, though Sir Abubakar had always expressed his preference for a national government in the press and the public, and to Chief Akintola and Chief Rusiji, he had never thought it fit to mention it to me. In May 1962, the party moved to charge Akintola with disloyalty and anti-party activities. Although he had pleaded guilty to the charges and apologized for his conduct, he refused to step down from his position as premier and deputy leader. When a petition to remove him from the post was acceded to by the standing governor of the Western region, Akintola commenced High Court proceedings claiming that he had the support of the majority of the members of the Western Region House of Assembly. A meeting of that assembly, called by the party to test his claim, turned into fracas, which Enahoro narrated as follows. When the House met on 25th May 1962, Chief Awolowo and I were sitting in the distinguished guests box behind Mr. Speaker. Supporters of Chief Akintola and the NCNC, who were at that time indisputably the minority, commenced a fight in the chamber. NCNC members marched across the floor and waded into action group members. One NCNC supporter lifted mace from its place of rest and tried to hit Mr. Speaker, but missing him, smashed it on the table and broke it. A minister, Kesintin Momo, was struck on the head with a sharp instrument and bled freely. The NPC-NCNC government quickly rushed to suspend democracy in the Western region by declaring a state of emergency on 29th May 1962. Enahoro continued. So within 4 days of the rioters' assembly at Ibadan, the federal government had suspended the Western government and legislature, adopted a mass of stringent regulations, appointed an administrator, and restricted leading politicians. Had it all been arranged long beforehand, with a question mark, the federal government was not accustomed to such speed. From this point forward, the Western region was effectively under military occupation by a Nigerian army composed principally of northern troops under the overall command of a British officer. The region will remain under military occupation until the Biafran War. Wow. Do you know that I never knew that it was that long? I knew about the state of emergency declared in the Western region by Balewa. I never knew until the Biafran War, Yoruba land was under the northern military occupation. Now I know. But let's continue. Breaking up the action group's political base. The British stand against the creation of new states ahead of independence had forced the issue to return later with greater force and under an administration with far less moral authority to deal with it. It is not exaggeration to say that all the post-independence crisis in Nigeria can be traced back to these decisions because, left in the hands of the three dominant ethnic groups, the issue of the creation of new states simply became a political weapon for use in emasculating rival regions. The creation of new states had been one of the key, potentially vote-winning policies being pushed by the action group in the territory of both the North and the East. With the Western region being the least heterogeneous of the three regions, the Edo people being the only significant minority group, it had been an easy policy for the party to push. In contrast, the East had many minority groups, and the North had even more. Especially in the Middle Belt area. The action group saw in the policy the prospect of cutting the North down to size by undermining the One North policy. To this end, it built close relationship with the Christian TV in the Middle Belt and with the Muslim Kanuri in the Northeast. Both groups who were known to defend their independence from the Hausa Fulani. One more, the NPC with the support of the British Colonial Office and its NCNC allies were to beat the action group to the punch. Had the colonial government responded to the demand for the creation of new states, it would have been hard-pressed not to do something in each of the three regions equally. It would not have carved a new Midwest state out of the Western region without taking similar measures in the Eastern and Northern regions, especially since the Western region was the smallest and least heterogeneous of the three. But a new Nigerian coalition government made up of an alliance of the Eastern and Northern regions could do precisely that. It was telling that the act to create the Midwest region and effectively break up the Western region was published by the federal government on 24th May, 1962, the eve of the crucial meeting in the Western Regional House of Assembly, on the back of which a state of emergency in the region was declared. The state of emergency in Tifi country. The treatment given by the NPC NCNC government to the Tifi minority in the northern region, who were allies of the western region, could not have been more different from the new region that had just been created for the Midwesterners. Due to this mountainous terrain, due to their mountainous terrains and their fighting spirits, the TV had never been easy to conquer. The British found the task difficult, and the Fulani found it impossible. Now that the British were leaving the TV, the TV were deeply hostile to the idea of being handed over to Fulani rule as part of the One North policy. Being Christians within the predominantly Muslim North, they felt their minority status twice over. The action group's policies towards minorities, and specifically the party's proposal of a Middle Belt state to be carved out of the North, had an obvious appeal to the TV. For this reason, the United Middle Belt Congress, UMBC, under the leadership of Joseph Tarka, became a close ally of the action group. In the MPC's calculation, this was a dangerous liaison, which, if not attacked, had the potential to give the action group a bridgehead into the North, with nothing to offer the Tifi to rival the action group's proposed Middle Belt states. The solution adopted was to frustrate the democratic aspiration of the UMBC with the aid of Tifi traditional rulers on the native authority. The trouble had started in the run-up to the November 1959 independence election. By the time the first explosion came in August 1960, the UMBC supporters in the TV division had exhausted their patience and tolerance for the local functionaries of the NPC regime. The government, having made it impossible for legitimate opposition voices to be heard, made itself vulnerable to violent aggression. Those targeted were the clan and kindred heads, court presidents and members, tax collectors, and generally known supporters of the NPC. The 1960 uprising, which first began in Yandev near Boko, soon spread like wildfire to other parts of TV divisions. The response of the NPC NCNC government to the uprising was ruthless. It dissolved the native authority and imposed collective punishment on all thieves by requiring every adult male to pay reparations for the riot damage. The failure of the same NPC and CNC government that had carved the Midwest state out of the Western region to redress the TV grievance in the same way led to a heightened sense of grievance. This, coupled with the arrest and imprisonment on charges of treason of the UMBC leader, Joseph Tarka, led to a bloodier uprising in 1964. The Balewa government's response was to send the army in. Of course, this was not the first time the army would be deployed to TV's division since independence. But the November 18, 1964 order was the first time when a massive military force involving a whole battalion, 3 Nigerian Army, including the Reese Squadron, was being mobilized for an internal security operation. Troops were never withdrawn again thereafter until the outbreak of the Civil War. And then dance with the remnants of the West. The final act in the NPC-NCNC Balewa Azikiwe government's systematic dismantling of the threat from the Western region was the announcement on 17th November 1962, 17th September rather, 1962, that the police had uncovered a plot to overthrow the government. Awolowo, Enahoro, and the TV political leader, Joseph Tarka, were now charged with treason. Tarka's position was remarkable. Just months before, in June 1961, he had been acquitted of a separate charge of treason against what had been the government of northern Nigeria. Fate smiled on him again as he was acquitted of all charges. His co-accused, Awolowo and Enahoro, were sentenced to prison for 10 and 12 years, respectively. After the Supreme Court dismissed their appeals on the 1st July 1964, what was expected to be a long period of forced removal from the political stage began for Awolowo and Enahoro. This, what seemed at first their misfortune, turned out to be good fortune, as their incarceration at the time of the first military coup in January 1966 perhaps saved their lives when other political leaders were murdered. At the same time, their survival contributed to giving the coup the coloration of an anti-North plot. In the meanwhile, the action group stood decapitated. When the state of emergency in the Western region was lifted in January 1964, instead of the NPC-NCNC alliance government directing new elections, it simply appointed Akintola as premier in succession to Awolowo in a new administration made up of Akintola's followers and members of the Western branch of the NCNC. Awolowo's action group, which had been the official opposition to the NPC-NCNC alliance, had effectively ceased to exist. The battle of the count. The next round of federal elections, scheduled for December 1964, were to be the first that Nigerians would be conducting for themselves. With the action group decapitated and effectively neutralized. It was looking like a two-way contest between NPC and the NCNC, with the NPC controlling the northern region and NCNC now controlling almost the whole of southern region after winning the February 1964 elections in the new Midwest states. The omens for free elections were never good. Both former alliance partners, NPC and NCNC, had benefited from the rigged independence elections. Each understood the importance of the census, since seats in the federal parliament were to be apportioned according to the population of each region. With the political parties reflecting regional and ethnic divide, it was clear to the contestants that the crucial first step to winning the next and indeed possibly all future elections in the country was to win the census due in 1962. Since neither of the former alliance partners trusted the other, a Briton, Mr. J.J. Warren, was appointed to head the count. Even so, the exercise ended in controversy when the results suggested that the South was more populous than the North. Notwithstanding the British manipulation through the division of the Cameroons, Aaron Smith put the census controversy into context here. Aaron Smith, he said, the massive power of the North rested on the census figures produced by the British officials in the early 1950s. All attempts to confirm those census figures since have proved a failure, and this has become the most bitterly contested issue in Nigerian politics. After the census in 1962, it was found that the northern region no longer had a numerical majority over the rest of the country combined. The NPC leaders found these results unacceptable and cancelled the results. The 1962 census returns were never officially published. In a fresh census in 1963, the North improved on its 1962 figures. If Southerners had thought that the new figures would end the North absolute majority, they were to be bitterly disappointed. It was little wonder that Awolowo commented bitterly that for himself and his party, the twilight of democracy and the rule of law in Nigeria is changing into darkness. While the census dispute was still raging, the western branch of the NCNC, led by Chief Fani Kayode, who was then the deputy premier of the western region, decamped from the party to join with Akintola's followers to form a new party under an old name, the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP. By this move, Akintola had contrived to take back the NCNC, the political legacy of Abat Macaulay in the Western region. After the Eastern region's challenge to the census figures was rejected by the Supreme Court on 29 August 1964, the federal government proceeded to release the final census figures, suggesting a total population of 55,620,268, of which 29,758,875 was said to be in the northern region, giving the North a comfortable majority over the South with 53.5% of the total. With the census battle thus having been won and lost, the stage was now set for the showdown federal elections. before breaking up the alliance with the East, Ahmadu Bello, the leader of the NPC, was never one to mince his word for long. With Awolowo in prison and Akintola having been installed as premier of the Western region, Bello effectively brought the alliance with the Eastern region and the NCNC to an end with the following declaration. Even if my party fails to get the required majority in the next federal elections, it will definitely not enter into a coalition with NCNC. The Igbos have never been true friends of the North and never will be. After using Azikiwe and the NCNC to neutralize Awolowo and his action group, Ahmadu Bello was done. They never trusted each other. Azikiwe knew, but he played along because he was going to become the governor general anyway. That was enough for him. Power. And when they were done with him, they put the entire blame on the Igbos. And at that time, the declaration was made. Igbos have never been true friend of the North and never will be. Ahmadu Bello. So it was the turn of the East after neutralizing the West in order to continue the control and the power dominance that they inherited from the British. That is the story. That is your history. It is now the turn of the East. Let's read further. On 26 September 1964, the NPC-NCNC alliance government was formally dissolved. 15 months later, on 15th January 1966, Ahmadu Bello and Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa would be murdered in a military coup. And by July 1967, the former partners, the North and the East, would be at war in the Biafran war. The build-up to crisis and conflict began with the federal election of December 1964. Let me take my first tea break. I know some of you probably are joining in now because we started early, okay? But it's no biggie, all right? As you are joining, kindly share it. Invite your friends, tag those that should be tagged, and then by the time I finish the reading part, we will open the line. So you can call in, express your own personal view on all of this going forward. Right. Let us continue. The end of the First Republic. Having failed with its challenge to the 1964 census or census figures, the NCNC knew that there was little hope for a fair electoral contest against its former partner. When the head of the Western branch of the party, Samuel Akintola, demerged the NNDP from the NCNC and went into alliance with the NPC under the banner name of the Nigerian National Alliance, the NCNC was left with no alternative but to go into alliance with those members of the action group who were still loyal to Awolowo. The coalition that Awolowo tried to have with Azikiwe, there was never to happen. In defeat, Azikiwe decided to go and look for the remnants of Awolowo while Awolowo is in prison. Make a coalition with them, build alliance with them. The beginning of an end. However, with Awolowo in prison and Azikiwe trapped in the presidency, this coming together of the decapitated parties was a poor shadow of the Southern Alliance that Awolowo had been pushing for all along. With the NNA effectively controlling the North and through Akintola also the Western region, the UPGA knew that to stand any chance of victory in the elections, it had to win seats in the Northern region. A hard task was made impossible by the no-holds-barred tactics adopted by the NPC-controlled federal government. The campaign was marked by a fair amount of thuggery by party stalwarts. Conditions were so bad in TV division that the army had to be sent in. Certain NPC officials in the North showed an excess of zeal when they forcibly prevented certain UPGA candidates in the far North from filling their nomination papers, and so secured the unopposed return of 67 NPC candidates. Faced with the prospect of being outmuscled in the electoral contests, the UPGA decided to boycott the elections in the mistaken assumption that its rival had any interest in a fair contest. When the NNA claimed victory by default in the East and in the Federation overall, the UPGA refused to accept the result. Azikiwe, the former leader of the Eastern region, but who had been kicked upstairs to the largely ceremonial office of President of the Federation in October 1963, was now drawn into the fray to decide who would form the new government. His former party in the East or his former partners in the North. He initially resisted Balewa's demand to be reappointed Prime Minister, to the point that President and Prime Minister were not on speaking terms. But suspending the constitution in the face of the stalemate depended upon his authority being accepted by the army. With a British general, Major General Everard, still the general officer commanding the Nigerian army, there was little prospect of him getting British support for anything but the return of Balewa to power. In the end, it was Balewa's enemy that he was forced to call upon to form the new government. After this very public standoff between Prime Minister and President, the administration had little prospect of making it through to the next scheduled elections. The importance of the post of the commander of the army, having been highlighted by this episode and having been previously stressed by Sherwood Smith, it is a curious thing that when in February 1965, Major General Everard had to be replaced by one of 4 Nigerian brigadiers, Maimalari, Ogundipe, Ademulegun, or Agoyin-Ironsi. It was the Igbo man, Agoyin-Ironsi, who was appointed rather than the northerner, Maimalari, especially since, as it will emerge later in these accounts, Agoyin-Ironsi appears not to have had the best credentials. Operation Wetie. The already heated political situation in the country was made worse when regional elections in the Western region followed in October 1965. At these elections, Akintola was looking to be legitimized as the political voice of the people of the Western region. For the NPC, victory in this elections for its alliance partner would put the party in a position where it would effectively be in control of the whole of Nigeria, excepting only the eastern region. With the memory of the imprisonment of their leader, Awolowo, still fresh, an insurgency broke out in the western region when the NPC-NNDP alliance partners resorted to the same bullying tactics they had used in the federal elections in the east to produce an improbable victory for Akintola's NNDP. The plan to foreclose any chance of an electoral victory for the NNDP's opponent was multifaceted. Opposition candidates and voters were often intimidated or prevented from filing nomination papers or voting. Even where opposition candidates managed to stand for election and win, results declared at polling stations. Radio announcements would announce a different set of results, with NNDP candidates being declared unopposed winners. The NNDP was shockingly declared the winner of the elections against all expectations. Many Westerners could not understand how a party they loved and voted against could have possibly gained a legitimate victory. Akintola's retention of power led to even greater violence in the Western region. Protests, arson, and murders placed many parts of the Western region into a state of near anarchy, which earned the region the nickname of the Wild West. Wild West. I remember that. While the federal government had been quick to declare a state of emergency on the back of the fisticuffs within the Western Region House of Assembly in 1962, it was content to stand back and watch the West burn, even though estimates suggested that more than 2,000 people had been killed in the violence, which trailed the announcement of Akintola's electoral victory. The federal government's indifference to the bloodshed in the Western region was all the more remarkable given that the Briton, Major General Welby Everett, was still the head of the army at this time. And another Briton, John Hilary Smith, was serving as Deputy Secretary to Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa. Everything pointed to the blind eye being a policy decision. The 1966 coups. It was while the West was burning that the first military coup in the country occurred on Saturday, 15th January, 1966. Of the many mysteries surrounding this coup, the most intriguing is how a soldier with the nickname Ironsi emerged as Nigeria's first military ruler. Major General Johnson Thomas Umunakwe Aguiyi Ironsi is said to have acquired the nickname while he was serving with a United Nations peacekeeping force in the Congo. It is suggested that the nickname Ironside had been given to him by British officers as a corruption of his surname, Ironsi, with reference to various military historical parallels on account of his feats of valor. Of his feats of valor. Only that it appears that his surname was not actually Ironsi, a word with no obvious meaning or common usage in the Igbo language, but simply Aguiyi, which means crocodile. Thus, it seems that what happened was that his nickname was corrupted to form part of his surname. Further, the suggestion that he was an exceptional soldier is not borne out by the available evidence. The following is an extract from a magazine interview that Major Chukwuma Nzeogu, the lead actor in the coup that brought him to power, is reported to have given in May 1967. Ejindu interviewing Kaduna Nzeogu now. So I will be quoting their charts. Ejindu asked, "Tell me, what do you think of him, Ironsi, as a soldier?" Nzeogu replied, "I'm afraid I cannot tell you that, but I will say that as a person, he was very well liked, and as the Supreme Commander, his orders were promptly carried out." Ejindu again, "If he joined the army as a gunner, he must have progressed as a military strategist." Nzeogu replied, "Yes, if he had, he could have done so. But he actually joined the army as a tally clerk and was a clerk most of the time." Nzeogu's assessment does not stand in isolation. Its thrust is supported by another account of Ironsi's performance in Congo. The report, "Lieutenant Colonel Ironsi's inexperience must also have added to the difficulties at Bukavu. When he was second in command of one QONR, he had not gone to the Cameroons, but had been left behind in Enugu to supervise the rear details. At Bukavu, he found himself faced by unusual difficulties, which would have taxed an experienced battalion commander, but he was evidently held partly to blame. When one QONR returned to Nigeria in May 1961, Ironsi was posted away to London to the obscure position of military advisor to the Nigerian High Commission, and he did not hold another command in the Nigerian Army until October 1964. The timing of the coup was also curious, given that it occurred just 3 days after the close of a Commonwealth conference that had been held in Lagos from 10 to 12 January to discuss the unilateral declaration of independence by the white minority government of Rhodesia. This being the first time that such a meeting of Commonwealth head of government was being held outside London, it would be reasonable to expect that intelligence gathering on security issues would have been of the highest order, not least because of the virtual civil war that was then raging in the Western region at this time, as graphically recounted by the British Prime Minister at the time, Harold Wilson, in his memoirs. "We arrived at about 10 p.m. on 10th January. Sir Abubakar and I drove to the city along a road that I came to know so well 3 years later. There was great enthusiasm at the roadside, but behind the shears sounded the ominous distance crackle of insurgent gunfire, which from time to time we were able to hear from the heavily guided conference hotel. The conference ended in an atmosphere of unity, even euphoria. Abubakar, full of justified pride, insisted on riding with me to the airport. Again, we heard the rifle fire. As we turned into the airport entrance, he said to me, 'You have a great future as Prime Minister of our mother country. You are fortunate. One thing only I wish for you, that you never have to become Prime Minister of a federal and divided country.' That was on Wednesday, 11th January. On the Saturday, 15th January, he was dead, and his body was later found in a ditch, the victims of a communal uprising. This was what the former British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, wrote in his own memoir of his own experience just a few days before the coup that killed Balewa, Bello, Akintola, and many others. What is more, Chukwuma Nzeogu, the driving force behind the coup, was already on the watch of British intelligence. Chukwuma was not only very vocal in his views about East-West relations, he even went as far as visiting Hungary in the summer of 1959 to see things for himself. Unknown to him, the British intelligence had been on his trail. Adewale Ademoyega, who together with Nzeogu and Ifeajuna was one of the three lead coup plotters, said that throughout 1965, Nzeogu spoke freely and openly to some young officers about his plan to stage a coup. In fact, during the planning stages of the coup, according to General Olusegun Obasanjo's account, a formal report had been made by one Captain Udowoid to Brigadier Ademulegun of Nzeogu's activities in brainwashing officers against the government. Obasanjo put it forward this way. Captain Udowoid quoted Chukwuma saying to junior officers, wait until the day you will look at the senior officers through the sights of your rifles. Brigadier Ademulegun, who was a victim of the coup, received the letter and referred it to Colonel Shodende, another victim of the coup, and Chukwuma's commandant, for his comments. Brigadier Ademulegun reported the case to Army headquarters in Lagos and described Chukwuma as a young man in a hurry who should be closely watched. Obasanjo does not say what the response from Army headquarters was, and neither did Brigadier nor the Colonel lived to tell the tale after the coup. The Igbo coup claim. Above all else, the most intriguing aspect of the tale of Ironsi's emergence as Nigeria's first military ruler is the coincidence of the nickname Ironside with the old Ironsides, nickname of Oliver Cromwell, Britain's first military ruler following a coup. Still, the coup was said to be an Igbo coup to seize power from the north. Those propagating this view, those propagating this viewpoints to the fact, those propagating this view points to the fact that not only did an Igbo Major General Aguiyi emerge as the new military ruler, the lead actors in the coup plot, with one Yoruba exception, Adewale Ademoyega, were Igbos, that the coup succeeded in eliminating its main targets in the north, the premier of the northern region, Ahmadu Bello, and the federal prime minister, Tafawa Balewa, and their allies in the west, Premier Samuel Akintola, and Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh. Awolowo and Enahoro languishing safely in prison, while those who might have been targets in the eastern region, President Nnamdi Azikiwe and Premier Michael Okpara, were left untouched, lent support to this view. However, the claim that this was an Igbo coup targeted at northerners is not credible, considering other factors that have emerged. In the first place, the victim count does not take account of the fact that Brigadier Ademulegun and Colonel Shodende, the two most senior Yoruba officers in the army, were killed. Also, Major General Onwuatuegu, after killing Shodeinde, simply arrested the governor of the northern region, Kashim Ibrahim, when he might have been eliminated if the Igbo power grab story is to be believed. More importantly, the lead actor, Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogu, certainly did not see himself as pursuing any Igbo agenda. He was one of the Igbos who had been born and raised in the north. In Kaduna, his best friend was Olusegun Obasanjo, a Yoruba man. His politics was pan-Africanist in the mold of Azikiwe. When asked about whether the coup was driven by a tribal agenda, his response was categorical. He said, in the north, no. In the south, yes. We were 5 in number. And initially, we knew quite clearly what we wanted to do. We had a short list of people who were either undesirable for the future progress of the country, or who by their positions at the time had to be sacrificed for peace and stability. Tribal considerations were completely out of our minds at this stage. But we had a setback in the execution. Both of us in the north did our best, but the other 3 who were stationed in the south failed because of incompetence and misguided considerations in the 11th hour. The most senior among them was in charge of a whole brigade and had all the excuse and opportunity in the world to mobilize his troops anywhere, anyhow, and anytime. He did it badly. In Lagos, even allowing for 1 or 2 genuine mistakes, the job was badly done. The Midwest was ever a big problem. But in the East, our major target, nothing practically was done. He and the others let us down. Ademoyega is equally emphatic in dismissing the suggestion that the coup was driven by an ethnic agenda. Ademoyega wrote, contrary to the load of wicked propaganda that had since been heaped on us, there was no decision at our meeting to single out any particular ethnic group for elimination or destruction. Our intentions were honorable, our views were national, and our goals were idealistic. We intended that the coup should be national in execution so that it would receive nationwide acclamation. What seems clear is that a coup of the kind that Flight Lieutenant Rawlins was to later carry out in Ghana, a non-partisan and across-the-board elimination of those who had been identified as the enemies of a united Nigeria, is what the lead coup plotters had planned, as well as ending the bloodshed in the western region that the Balewa government was neglecting. A key objective had been to reorient the army. In the words of Ademoyega, listen, if the army was made to see itself as part of the people, to embrace the same ideology as the people under a revolutionary and not a political party system, and if the army was turned into a productive arm of government, then it would neither have been used as an instrument to sponsor political riots, as was the case in the days that Lieutenant Colonel Azan U. Kassina governed northern Nigeria, nor could it have been used as an instrument of pogrom, as it was used in the days that Gowon took over the reins of power in the Federation. It would also not have been used as an instrument of arson, looting, and brigandage, as it was used during the Civil War. The economic order was to have been changed so that Nigerians could produce most of the things that they needed for the betterment of their lives. There was to have been a program of mass education, and the system of traditional rulers had been marked for abolition, according to Ademoyega. Ademoyega wrote, a post of obas, obis, emirs, and amayanabos constituted the greatest anachronisms in the Nigerian society of 1965. These natural rulers were useful instruments of corruption and compromise, first under the British and later under the Nigerian politicians. Of what use to the society were those glorified idols that had eyes but would not see, and had ears but would not hear, but merely served as conduits to pass a bribe to the people in order to miscarry social justice? Many of them were diabolical, and their continued existence is inimical to social takeoff and progress. Wow. In the area of foreign policy, the plan was for Nigeria to live up to its independence by putting an end to our total dependence on NATO weaponry. That the plans were never carried through was because the coup was hijacked by the conservative forces within the army, without the people actually realizing what had happened. Hardly could the people tell much difference between the Unzeogu group of revolutionaries and the Ironsi group of reactionaries. More so because Ironsi did not publicize this difference and deliberately refused to tell the world that Unzeogu and his group had been clamped in jail. People thought Unzeogu's coup succeeded, and they installed Agunye Ironsi. That is why the propaganda of claiming the first January 15 coup of 1966, the reason why the propaganda of calling it Igbo coup, was because those who planned the coup, announced the coup, Unzeogu and others, they were clamped in jail, while Ironsi was riding on their victory, making the people believe that, yes, the military had taken over, and he, Ironsi, is now in charge until the later dates. So let's continue. The coup was only given an Igbo coloration as an excuse to deal with the Igbo challenge to northern rule. Far from being driven by ethnicity, the most remarkable feature of the January coup, is that a significant number of the principal actors in the coup were the first graduates to enter the Nigerian army. I will take is that going to be my second tea break? So the second tea break for me, and maybe a tea break for you too. So let's thank you so much, by the way, for listening in. Interesting, isn't it? Very, very interesting. History is great, and for us not being prisoners of history is greater. When you know better, you have to do better, my dear. You see all this tribalism, ethnicism, religious fanaticism, all of these are politically sponsored and ingrained into our system for one reason and reason only. When we remain that way, this contraption will remain a hellhole for all of us. But when you know better, you are expected to do better, my dear. You are expected to do better. My TikTok broadcast seems to have stopped, so I'm going to put that back on while I'm doing my tea break. Give me a sec. Right. So thank you so much, everyone who is still here with us. And you have to do better than the Better Edu. Here you get. Better Edu is a thief, a career thief, a career criminal in the midst of the people you can call the locusts, the leeches that feed off, the people. Always remember that. When you know better, you do better. Not like Better Edu, but better than Better Edu. Right. Let us continue. By January 1966, the Nigerian Army had 7 graduates with combatant commissions. They had Lieutenant Colonel Emeka Ojukwu and Victor Banjo, and majors like Olufemi Olutoye, Major Adewale Ademoyega, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, Major Emmanuel Udeaja, and Major Oluwole Rotimi. All 7 were Southerners, and either Igbo, Ojukwu, Ifeajuna, Udeaja, or Yoruba, Banjo, Olutoye, Ademoyega, and Rotimi. 3 or 4 of these graduates were involved conceptually or physically in Nigeria's first military coup. Banjo and Ifeajuna were students together at the University of Ibadan. Banjo and Udeaja had degrees in mechanical engineering from the Royal Military College of Science, Shrivenham, UK. Ojukwu had a degree in history from Lincoln College, Oxford University. The combined intellectual capacity of the principal military actors in the military in January 1966 coup and the Biafra sequel is certainly interesting. In this, they were a completely different class from their army colleagues who went on to rule Nigeria. Emmanuel Ifeajuna had literally lived to fame by winning a gold medal in the high jump at the British Empire and Commonwealth Games in 1954. He had followed this achievement with a science degree at the University of Ibadan before joining the army in 1960. Adewale Ademoyega, the Yoruba man in the coup plot, received a degree in history from the University of London before joining the army in 1962. Odumegu Ojukwu was arguably the most educated soldier of them all, having attended CMS Grammar School, King's College, Lagos, Epsom College, and obtained a master's degree in history from Oxford University. That these graduate soldiers all ended up on the Biafran side of the divide at the start of the conflict, and all, with the exception of Ojukwu and Ademoyega, were killed in one way or another by the end of the war. Suggests that the long-standing war against educated natives were being played out within the Nigerian army. What is clear is that the lead actors in the January 1966 coup were radicals and intellectuals rather than Igbo tribalists. It was the educated natives whose presence in the army had been of such concern to the British, who were rising against the gangsterism and disorder, corruption, and despotism of the new order that the colonial office manipulations had brought about. Among the senior officers arrested, officers with degrees and officers who had spent at least 2 years in England at Sandhurst were prominent. Of the 14 captains and officers of higher rank, 8 had been to Sandhurst, although there were only 6 graduates in the army who held combatant commissions. 3 of these were accused of taking part in the plots: Lieutenant Colonel Banjo, Major Ifeajuna, and Major Ademoyega. The impression that it was an Igbo coup for the Igbos to grab power from the north came from events and circumstances beyond the control of the coup plotters. First was the fact that most of the leading minds of the coup were from the rank of majors in the Nigerian army. And due to the recruitment policies that were in place while the army was under British control, most soldiers of that rank were Igbos. The Nigerianization program unwittingly stratified the army on ethnic lines. By the mid-1960s, the army's most senior officers were career soldiers who had originally enlisted as NCO, non-commissioned officers. That's what NCOs means, okay? And then rising through the rank, most of these were Yoruba: Samuel Ademulegun, Babafemi Ogundipe, Ralph Shodeinde, Robert Adebayo rather. Immediately behind them in seniority were the first Sandhurst-trained generation of army officers. These men were largely Kanuri Muslims from the north: Zakaria Maima Lari, Umar Lawan, Kor Muhammad. Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi was the only member of the army's top stratum that was not Yoruba or Kanuri. The lieutenant colonels were ethnically diverse. Example: Ejo, Ojuku, Kurubo. But many of the majors were Sandhurst-trained Igbos. And most junior officers like lieutenants and non-commissioned officers were northerners who had been encouraged to join the army's infantry by an army recruitment campaign by northern politicians. This meant that when the senior strata of the army officer hierarchy ended their careers, their successors commanders would inevitably emerge from the middle grade officers' ranks dominated by Igbos. These Igbos would be directly commanding mostly northern subordinates. The psychology of this relationship was later to prove fatal. Thus far from the army being the tribalized institution in the country, it was itself ethnically stratified. So at the coup, being an Igbo plot driven by tribal sentiments, it is odd that all the lead Igbo actors were young Igbos who had spent all or most of their lives living in the north, who were more comfortable speaking Hausa than Igbo, and whose connection with the Igbo heartland was tenuous, to the point that they barely could find the way to their family compounds in the east unassisted. Again, it would seem that the Igbos were doing their utmost to headline their tribal agenda. Thus, although the Council of Ministers meeting of 16th January 1966, which handed over power to the army, included members from other ethnic groups, it was an Igbo man, Dr. Nwafo Orizu, the Senate President, who made the public announcement that a fellow Igbo, Aguiyi-Ironsi, was taking over. The picture of a brazen Igbo takeover was then completed when the new Igbo leader appointed his fellow Igbo, Francis Nwokedi to recommend the dismantling of the federal arrangements that had been the North insurance against the threats of Southern domination. Are you following? Of course you are. The narrative that the coup was an Igbo attack on Northerners is further undermined by the fact that not only did Aguiyi-Ironsi leave his personal security in the hands of the Northern soldiers, his administration gave preferential treatment to Northern politicians. Whilst the administration had no qualm over arresting and detaining members of other political parties, it left NPC politicians untouched, even though, as the party in power, it was the excesses of this party of the North that had precipitated the coup. The Niger Delta Republic. The special relationship that existed between the Fulani North and the Jaws of the Niger Delta requires explanation. The patchwork of ethnicities within each of the major regions meant that each had fault lines that would force eruption on any increase, real or perceived, in the power of the dominant ethnic group. In the eastern region, the Jaw people of the Niger Delta were to the dominant Igbos, as the TV ethnic group were to the dominant Hausa Fulani in the northern region. Just as the action group had been hard at work cutting the Tifis to the NPC, so the Tifis, so the NPC had been cultivating a relationship with the Jaws. It was the Jaws who first reacted to the January coup that produced the new Igbo leadership, when on 23rd February 1966, little more than a month after the coup, Major Isaac Adaka Boro declared the independence of his Ijaw people from Nigeria and the creation of the Niger Delta Republic. The Ijaw revolt lasted just 12 days before it was crushed by Nigerian forces, making it the 12-day revolution. For the insurrection, Isaac Boro received a long jail sentence, but in May 1967, in the run-up to the outbreak of the Biafran War, he was granted an amnesty by the federal government. It should come as no surprise that after his amnesty, he joined the federal side against Biafra. With all the propaganda value that brought to the federal cause, he was then killed, though in mysterious circumstances, on 16th May 1968, before the war's end. In the use of force to crush the Ijaw secession, the Igbo-led federal government had set a precedent for the federal reactions to the Igbo people's own secession attempts when it came. In the meantime, they had created a vengeful neighbor at their rear within the geographical space that they would soon call the Republic of Biafra. The 29th July 1966 counter-coup. For one, into whose slap power had so suddenly dropped and who had no track record in political science, it is curious that Aguiyi-Ironsi seemingly had a clear view about the constitutional order that Nigeria needed. Within days, he was declaring that all Nigerians want an end to regionalism. And in February, he had set up his one-man commission of inquiry to report on the means by which a united Nigeria could be delivered. On 24th May 1966, Aguiyi-Ironsi proclaimed a new decree, number 34, by which he abolished the regions and declared Nigeria ceases to be what has been described as a federation. It now becomes simply the Republic of Nigeria. This was a strange move in the climate of the times. The North opposition to a unitary Nigeria was common knowledge. They had threatened to pull out of the federation altogether in the wake of the constitutional crisis following the Action Group's 1953 independence motion, and had only been persuaded to remain in the Union by the British assurances that the federation with the South would be a loose one. Beyond the curiosity surrounding its name, Ironsi was no stranger to the colonial offices, having been aide-de-camp to Governor Macpherson. Added to this was the presence of his British predecessor as head of the Nigerian Army, Major General Welby Everard. On a return visit to Nigeria when the coup happened, and then there is the coincidence of the January 1966 coup, with a spate of coups occurring around this time in various African states that had recently attained independence from European powers. Gabon in February 1964, Algeria in June 1965, Congo, Leopoldville, November 1965, Central African Republic, January 1965, and Ghana, February 1966. Writing around the time of the July 1966 counter-coup in the New Left Review, one Roger Murray made the following observation. During the past 3 years, actions initiated or prosecuted by the military has determined the overthrow of no less than 11 African head of states, and has seriously endangered 4 further regimes. 8 of the successor regimes are headed by military men. Over the last 6 months, coups have proceeded at a feverish rhythm. In the aftermath of the January 1966 coup in Nigeria and the unification decree, it was said of the Ironsi administration that, as far as can be discerned, they aimed to restore the political institutions of the old colonial era, recreating a new guise, the hierarchy of governor, residents and district officers, united in a single public service and advised by subservient natural rulers. This was a sudden and fundamental shift of political discretion. It was a direct assault on everything that the North, under Ahmadu Bello's leadership, had been holding out for. Bello's murder, followed by the removal of the buffers against Southern domination that he had erected, especially the regional civil service, was bound to produce a violent reaction. Major General Philip Effiong, the second in command to the Biafran leader, General Ojukwu, is blunt in his assessment of the events leading up to the counter-coup. So, General Philip Effiong wrote or observed, there was good reason to believe that there was a British-backed plan for a northern reprisal action. The Ahmadu Bello University had, for instance, become a center for counter-insurgency planning under the instigation of a former British officer who had once served in the Nigerian army. The reaction came on the 29th May 1966, just 5 days after the promulgation of the decree, with the first round of a series of murderous programs against Igbos in the north. Then came the counter-coup on 29th July 1966, led by Lieutenant Colonel Muritala Muhammad, beginning with a wholesale slaughter of Igbo officers within the barracks, starting in Abeokuta and repeated across various barracks in Lagos, Kaduna, and Kano. Care was taken to ensure that weapons were issued to Northerners only. This elimination of Igbo officers was a first step in a war to come. After dawn on 29th July, the massacre of officers and men of Eastern origin took place all over Nigeria with a speed, precision, and uniformity of pattern that took away any subsequent excuse or spontaneity. Ironsi had spent just 194 days in office before he was murdered in this counter-coup. By the end of his short tenure, Nigeria had been returned to something very close to the colonial model, a unitary government with a unified public service, free of political parties and elections. The next most senior military figure after Ironsi was Brigadier Ogundipe, a Yoruba. But this was about power, not seniority. Northern officers having made it clear that they would, with Maimalari, Kor, Lagema, and Palm all dead, Yakubu Gowon was now the most senior surviving Northern officer in the Nigerian army. As a Christian from the Middle Belt, his appointment had the attraction of playing down the Muslim-Christian divide whilst restoring power to the North. Like Ironsi, who he was succeeding, he too was close to the British administration, having served as a chief administrative officer, adjutant general under Welby Everard, until the Britain completed his tour of duty in January 1965. In the aftermath of the counter-coup, Nigeria was back to a unitary government under Northern control. The restoration of direct Fulani control would have to wait until the Biafra secession was crushed. The road to Biafra. I want to take another tea break, by the way, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you so much for sparing your time with me still, all right? Another tea break, and we are almost going to be done. Do you know that if I use the next 1 hour in reading, we could actually finish the book? Should we actually make it a deal, right, that we'll finish the book before we take calls today? Should we? Now, let's make it a deal. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, so far who has been here. Okay. Just make sure that you are sharing this. Share it. Don't worry about the numbers of people watching. These are people who are interested in this. And it is very, very important. And once you share it, you're going to get others interested too to come around and be part of this. And if this is the first time of listening to this, okay, this is Maiyegun's Diary Political. Go back into the diary and see from when we started, from chapter 1, okay? This is us at chapter 8. We're going to touch chapter 9 very soon, and that's going to be the end of it, or possibly chapter 10 as well. I don't think we have up to 40 pages left to read. In fact, let me give it a number. So we are currently on page 252, okay? And this is going to end at page 307. So practically, what we need is just another 50, 52, 55, another 55 pages to read. Let's see if we can do that in an hour, okay? So let's continue. Let's continue now. Brilliant. So, the road to Biafra. One man on whom Gowon's credentials as the most senior northern officer made scant impression was Colonel Ojukwu, the governor of the Eastern region or Eastern Nigeria. Emeka Ojukwu, Odumegu Ojukwu Chukwuemeka, was born in November 1933, like Nnamdi Azikiwe, in Zungeru, northern Nigeria, to Igbo parents. By the time the family moved to Lagos, at the end of the Second World War, his father, Sir Louis Odumegu Ojukwu, was probably the richest man in Nigeria, the Aliko Dangote of his time. Like Azikiwe, Ojukwu spoke the three main languages, Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, to different levels of fluency. He had received the best education that money could buy. King's College, Lagos, Epsom College in Surrey, 1 year of a law degree at Oxford before obtaining an honors degree in military history there. On returning home, he joined the civil service as an administrative officer in the Eastern region before joining the Nigerian Army in 1957. With these credentials, if any Nigerian could be said to have been born to rule Nigeria, it was Chukwuemeka Odumegu Ojukwu. However, at this point in time, the very existence of Nigeria was in question. There was no enthusiasm for it within the three major regions. The Western region was still in ashes from the insurgency, the wake of the slaughter of their people that had occurred on 29th May and 29th July 1966. The Igbos were abandoning Nigeria for their homeland. Even after Lieutenant Gowon was installed as Supreme Commander, he was unable to prevent further murders, as that of Major Ekanem, when he had been summoned to military headquarters. Within a few days, all Easterners in the army were either dead, in prison, or had escaped to the east. Those still alive were to later return to Enugu in exchange for the northern soldiers who had formed part of the battalion there. In all, according to a list issued by the Eastern Region government, at least 43 officers and 170 other ranks were murdered during the counter-coup. Even the Hausa Fulani had been heard shouting, Araba, separate, 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 during the May pogroms against Igbos. The evidence suggests that they were bent on this course right up to the moment that Gowon was appointed Supreme Commander and head of the Supreme Military Council on the 1st of August, 1966. A close examination of the speech that Gowon delivered on that occasion suggests an 11th hour change of plan, because having explained the sectional killings in the January coup and the May and July pogroms, he presaged a dramatic announcement with the following words: I have now come to the most difficult parts, or the most important parts of this statement. I am doing it, conscious of great disappointment and heartbreak. It will cause all true and sincere lovers of Nigeria and of Nigerian unity, both at home and abroad, especially our brothers in the Commonwealth. As a result of the recent events and the other previous similar ones, I have come to strongly believe that we cannot honestly and sincerely continue in this wise as the basis of trust and confidence in our unitary system of government has not been able to stand the test of time. I have already remarked on this issue in question. Suffice to say that putting all considerations to tests, political, economic, as well as crucial, the basis for unity is no more there, or is badly rocked. Not only once, but several times. This was Gowon's statement the day they announced him as the head of state of Nigeria. He was preparing to announce that northern Nigeria was breaking up from the southern Nigeria. Last minute, when they told them they will suffer if they try that, they will suffer. So then they said, you better just stay here so that the rest of you, including the southerners, will suffer with you too. All of us are suffering now. Remember that, never forget. After this build-up, what came next was an anticlimax. I therefore, from Gowon's statement, I therefore feel that we should review the issue of our national standing and see if we can help stop the country from drifting away into utter destruction. Rather than a declaration of Araba, it was simply a call for a conference. All the signs were that Britain had once again stepped in to stop the North from seceding. The Northerners had shouted it in May and had it in their minds ever since. Now was their time to make it a reality. Was there anybody in their way? Certainly none. Was there anything to stop them? Yes, self-interest. Who could use this to stop them? Their friends, especially the international ones, the British and the Americans, and of course, some faithful Nigerians who still believed in the continuity of the nation. When Gowon was formally appointed as Supreme Commander and head of the Supreme Military Council on 1st August 1966, Ojukwu could not bring himself to accept his authority, and he had just cause. Gowon was his junior within the rank-conscious army hierarchy, and besides, decisions of the Supreme Military Council were supposed to be made by consensus and not by majority. The country had effectively divided into two, and the countdown to Biafra had begun. The Aburi Accord. The price for both former partners, North and East, was the support of the West. However, the race for the West sympathies had been skewed against the East, even before it began, by those advising Ironsi when they had advised him against granting the plea for amnesty that Awolowo had made in March 1966 on behalf of himself and his colleagues. On 3rd August 1966, Gowon released Awolowo and Enahoro from prison to the adulation of their Yoruba and Edo people. Together with the release of Ijo leader Azikiwe, these moves ensured the isolation of the Igbos amongst the big four ethnic groups in the South. The North U-turn from Araba set in motion the arrangement for an ad hoc constitutional conference, which was to take place in Lagos in September 1966. The conference saw a reversal of positions by the former partners, the East and the North. The Igbos, who had all along being the chief advocates of one Nigeria with a powerful center, were now holding out for a confederacy, while the Hausa Fulani, who had all along been insisting upon the loosest federal arrangement, now insisted upon the type of unitary government the Ironsi administration had pushed through. You see that the northern position was completely contrary to the proclamation that Gowon had made just days before. This, that the basis of trust and confidence in our unitary system has not been able to stand the test of time, was evidence of external influences being brought to bear on the nation, on the situation. The northern agenda had also taken a more sinister turn. It was no longer simply a matter of northern rule. They were bent upon upon crushing the Igbos permanently. Even as the conference was going on, the third in the series of programs against Igbos in the north started in mid-September. It reached a crescendo. On 29 September 1966, Colonel Gowon made a radio broadcast apparently intended to bring the violence to an end. In it, he said, "It appears that it is going beyond reason and is now at the point of recklessness and irresponsibility. Far from abating, the program on that day exploded from a blaze into a holocaust." According to one account, the number of Igbos killed ranged from 10,000 to as high as 30,000. The army, who might have been expected to be the last restraints on civilian excesses, were in fact leading the slaughter in northern Nigeria. Over 30,000 Igbos were slaughtered starting from mid-September 1966, while negotiation for whether they want to have unitary government, regional government, or whatever it is, while the conference was going on. Are you paying attention, right? See how in the course of the whole political journey, the history, do you see how the politics is switching and changing the tables every now and then? And for every table changed, lives were lost. Political decisions were turning the tables. They were making partners, allies here and there. And along the line, as the table was turning, lives were being lost. Pay attention. So, on the aftermath of Saturday, October 1, 1966, the 5th Battalion's troops mutinied and opened fire as their commander, Major Kyari, addressed them on the battalion parade ground. The rampaging soldiers were so out of control that even northerners who tried to restrain them were murdered. The troops raided the battalion armory, broke out of the barracks and headed into town to pick up local civilians, thugs, whom they asked to take them to locations where they could find Igbos. Igbos trying to escape were not spared. At Kano Airport, the soldiers set upon a crowd of Igbo refugees boarding a southbound flight and killed them. Some were dragged out of the plane cabin and shot. Igbo workers at the airport were also hunted down and killed. Sometimes inside the terminal, the soldiers also made their presence felt at the railway station, where Igbo civilians were waiting to board trains to escape. Many of the Igbos would-be passengers and railway staff were shot dead. To take the heat out of the situation, it was agreed on 9th August 1966 that all troops should return to their regions of origin, while Eastern troops returned to the East. Northern troops remained in the West and Lagos on the excuse that the West had no troops of its own to fill the security vacuum that would arise when Northern troops withdrawn. When the delegates from the South made compliance with the agreement, a condition of their continued participation in the ad hoc conference, the Northern response was uncompromising. On 30th November 1966, Gowon simply announced the dissolution of the ad hoc constitutional conference and the appointment of a committee to draw up a new constitution. By reneging on the agreement on troop withdrawal, after the East had complied, the North had put itself in a position where it had unchallenged control of all regions apart from the East, thus ensuring that the war would be fought exclusively on Eastern territory, outside of Nigeria. Aburi in Accra, Ghana, was the chosen location for the meeting of the Supreme Military Council, which took place on the 4th and 5th January 1967. A number of agreements, sorry, my voice may be a little bit out. I'll tell you why. My microphone, I think my touchable microphone is dead. So let's put something back on it so that I can keep it back on and my voice can remain a bit and still louder. You know what I mean? Give me a sec. Right. I think that should do it. I'm not sure it's going to really do it, but it should be a little bit better. Thank you. So let's continue. So the road to Aburi in Accra, Ghana. As a result, Ojukwu now insisted. Ojukwu now insisted on all future talks being held in neutral territory outside of Nigeria. So Aburi in Accra, Ghana was the chosen. So I think we've taken that. And the meeting took place on the 4th and the 5th of January 1967. A number of agreements were reached in Aburi, which, had they been honored, would have averted the war. The use of force to resolve the crisis was renounced. The ad hoc conference on the future shape of Nigeria was to be resumed. The decrees which had been passed to change the government from federal to unitary were to be identified and repealed. And the agreement of 9th August 1966 for Northern troops to withdraw from Lagos and Western region was to be implemented and complemented by a massive recruitment of Yorubas into the army. There was no room for controversy about what had been discussed and agreed at the Aburi Accord because the discussion had been recorded. Aburi is probably unique in the annals of historic confrontations. The entire 2 days proceedings, apart from 2 short breaks, were recorded by the Ghanaians who afterwards gave each military governor and Gowon a copy of the tapes. For once, the outsider can be the fly on the wall of history and hear what the leading characters said. The way they said it at the time they said it, cutting through the web of conflicting interpretation and propaganda that later throttled the truth. The war happened because the Northern leadership was bent upon a military solution and so reneged upon all that had been agreed at Aburi. The Awolowo and Ojukwu parley. The North, having beaten the East to the punch with the release of Awolowo on 6th May 1967, the Gowon government sent him to Enugu at the head of a 4-man delegation to meet with Ojukwu to make a final appeal. Just a few days before, on the 1st May 1967, Awolowo said in a speech in Ibadan, if the Eastern region is allowed by act of omission or commission to succeed from or opt out of Nigeria, then the Western region and Lagos must also stay out of the federation. This has been interpreted to mean that Awolowo had pledged Yoruba support for Igbo secession. However, as in Aburi, the meeting of the two leaders was recorded and the transcript bellies the post-war propaganda. The North, having brought the Western region, the Midwest, and the Niger Delta on side with the release from prison of Awolowo, Enahoro, and Isaac Boro, the Igbo leadership realized they were isolated. Ojukwu's attempt to use this meeting with Awolowo to form an alliance with the Western region was coming at the 11th hour in the May month in which the independent state of Biafra was to be declared. To Ojukwu's suggestion that they could now use the meeting at hand to discuss a common front for the South, Awolowo's response was unequivocal. He said, it will be something near fraud for us to sit down here and discuss in terms of the South, especially as this delegation was sent by a body consisting of the Northern delegation. That was what Awolowo told Ojukwu. But let's continue. Awolowo's concern to ensure that any discussion with Ojukwu with a view to a common front for the South was in the open was hardly surprising, given that barely 9 months had elapsed since it was released on a pardon from the government that he was representing at this meeting, from a long term of imprisonment following a conviction for treason. What the transcript of the parley shows is Awolowo making it clear that with the Western region and Lagos still under Northern military occupation, the Yoruba were not ready to follow the Igbos if they decided to go ahead with secession. So, again, here is what is believed to have been said by Awolowo on this issue. Awolowo said, and I may say in this connection of Southern solidarity, I am sorry to go into what happened in the past in 1953. There was an understanding between the band NCNC and the band Action Group. We entered into an agreement, which I hope we will use sometime, to the effect that if the North remained intransigent, we would declare a Southern Dominion. This was signed by myself and Zeke, and I still stand by it. But we prefer that you should send your delegates to the meeting, to this meeting, so that we should, known to everyone, enter into negotiation among ourselves and present a common front to the North. Then nobody can accuse us of conspiracy or trying to divide the country into two parts. I want you to look at it from our point of view. If there were no Northern soldiers in the West, the position would be different. And even if by the time I return home, the Northern soldiers have gone, I still do not want to be accused of perfidy. The issue at hand is not enough for us to say we do not like the North. Rather than encouraging the Igbos to make the unilateral move for Biafra, the path which Awolowo recommended to Ojukwu was the Eastern delegation to attend the reconciliation meeting and to join in a united Southern political front with a view to securing at least moral support internationally if a split later became unavoidable. So, the main concern of these delegates is to ensure that Nigeria does not disintegrate And I would like to see Nigeria bound together by any bond, because it is better than breaking the whole place up, because each unit will be the loser for it. The economy of the country is so integrated that it is too late in the day to try and sever them without risking the death of one or both of them. So we have come, therefore, to appeal to you to let Eastern representatives attend the meeting of the Nigerian National Coalition Committee. I do not want to put myself in a position where I will be treated as an advocate of the Eastern cause. Let the Eastern delegates go there, make their case, and then as a member of the committee, I will get up and say, I support this entirely. If at the meeting, the East and West present what they want for a new Nigeria, whether temporarily or permanently, and the North says no, we are not going to have it, I will go out and address a world press conference and send our case to that body and say that this is what we have done and the North has turned it down. I will then take any step that is necessary to bring into effect what we want. The North needed to be in a position of being presented with the united front of the South. Awolowo. So the Eastern position was all the more tragic because it appears that the NCNC had also failed to stand with the action group when at the 1954 conference, the latter had proposed that the constitution should contain a right for any region to secede. Perhaps most significantly, the issue of secession was addressed. The action group had urged that such a right should be included in the constitution. The NCNC, in light of its sentiment for Nigerian unity, took a stand against it and was strongly supported by Littleton, a decision that confirmed the collapse of the action group and NCNC pact. The Declaration of Biafra. On the 27th of May, 1967, I'm actually going to take my supposed last break. So I want to say something. The propaganda of how they have tried, especially the Igbo propaganda, because there were Igbo propaganda to continue to malign Awolowo, to drag Awolowo and make Awolowo culprit, Awolowo a betrayer, Awolowo this, Awolowo that. Awolowo was very, as part of the men of that time, it was very, very clear when he met with Ojukwu that, listen, you are the guy in charge now, okay? I understand your position. I understand the situation. You see these guys, whatever their intention is, okay? It doesn't make any sense for me that it's a delegate, somebody freed by this Gowon government. I was released by him, okay? Now he sent me here to come and talk to you. You know something we can do? I will advise that you let your delegation or your delegate to attend that meeting of conference, okay? Don't withdraw from it. Now, when you are there, the West will be there too. Listen, you have your army. I am the leader of the Yorubas in the West. I do not have any army. My region is currently occupied by the northern soldiers. So if I sit down here and begin to talk to you about the secession of Biafra, it will be totally misleading and fraud. So he offered this advice. He, in fact, explained his position of how they could go about it. Ojukwu will have none of that. And not just Ojukwu, including some of his generals too. It's a done deal. The Igbos have suffered too much. The program and the rest of that. There is no way that the Igbos of Azikiwe that wanted one united Nigeria. And right now, that one Nigeria is now under the command of the North. And with this set out, killings of the Igbos and all that, it's just probably going to be a matter of time before they come down here and do same. No. We are not attending any meeting. You see the disagreement of these political leaders? Do you see what that led to? That's why they call the Biafran War the war of the egos of two men, Gowon and Ojukwu. But again, under the circumstances that they were all in, they were making decisions and things were happening so fast, so fast, that Every minute, every hour was very crucial. The declaration of Biafra. Anyway, thank you so much as well for those of you who have managed to share this. I implore those who haven't to do same, to please share, okay? What time do we have? I've got 40 minutes now to finish this book. I'm not sure I can in 40 minutes, but we agreed that we should finish the book before we take calls. So I will get on with it. The Declaration of Biafra. On the 27th May, 1967, the Eastern Region Consultative Assembly, meeting in Enugu, gave Ojukwu a mandate to declare at the earliest practical date Eastern Nigeria a free, sovereign, and independent state by the name and title of the Republic of Biafra. On the same day, Gowon responded by announcing the division of Nigeria into 12 states. In the Western region, the creation of 3 states, Lagos, Midwest, and Western states, was cosmetic, since the Midwest and Lagos were already in existence. The reconfiguration of the Northern Nigeria or Northern region into 6 new states, Northwest, Northeast, North Central, Kano, Benue, Plateau, and Kwara, was more administrative than political. The real change was in Ojukwu's eastern region, where 3 states were created. East Central State, comprising the present eastern region, excluding Calabar, Ogoja, and Rivers provinces. Southern State, comprising Calabar and Ogoja provinces. Rivers State, comprising Ahoda, Brass, Degema, Ogoni, and Port Harcourt divisions. What on its face looked like an even-handed exercise to balance the numbers of states in the north and the south was in fact a maneuver to further isolate the Igbos within the eastern region by bringing the minority groups in the region onto the side of the government and leaving the Igbos potentially landlocked in the event of secession. At the same time, the areas which contained the eastern region's oil were being separated from the core Igbo areas in the new East Central states. This move had been foreseen in the Willinkins Commission reports, in which the areas within the New Rivers and Southeastern states had been earmarked for special attention. In his speech announcing the creation of the new states, Gowon, in fact, made express reference to that report. The country has a long history of well-articulated demands for states. The fears of minorities were explained in great detail and set out in the report of the Willinkins Commission appointed by the British in 1958. The Willings report was, in other respects, uncannily prophetic in flagging up the threats to the country that lay ahead. Paragraph 42 was especially insightful in speaking of the absence of institutional roots and dependence upon characters who could disappear from the stage. Ojukwu and the Igbo leaders now found themselves between the devil and the deep blue sea. They could choose to remain within Nigeria in a landlocked, oil-stripped Igbo enclave, or they could gamble on succeeding with the entire old eastern region, with all Nigeria's known oil reserves. At 2 a.m. on 30th May 1967, Ojukwu declared the eastern region the sovereign states of Biafra. He did it at 2 a.m. I didn't know that. Right. Gowon's response was to draft into his administration the key political figures in the Western region and Midwest, whom he had earlier released from jail by appointing them to the Federal Executive Council. Awolowo was given the post of vice chairman and federal minister of finance, while Enahoro was made information minister. One was responsible for financing the war efforts against the other was responsible for defending it publicly. With Gowon at the head of affairs, to the outside world, it looked very much like a war between fellow Christians. Meanwhile, appointment of these Southerners to these key posts dealt a final blow to forming a common Southern front against the North. And in due course, they and other Southerners would be given the credit and the blame for the manner in which the war was prosecuted. Gowon made Awolowo the finance minister, Enahoro information minister, so that when they are fighting the war, Awolowo's name will be mentioned as the one funding and financing the war. And as they started the killings and hiding, Enahoro's words would be to tell the rest of the world that this is not ethnic cleansing. It was, in fact, Christian versus Christians. See the scheme? Sounds similar? Rings bell? It should ring bell. The British started it. They used the similar to dislodge some of those they found as opposition to their colonization, especially in the southern Nigeria, right? Now let's go forward. And that is why today, okay, let me go forward first. What Ojukwu had to lose from delaying secession is not clear, because there had been no more pogroms since September, October 1966. In the intervening 6 months, most Igbo survivors had returned to Igbo territory. That the events within Biafra were under the influence of fifth columnists, supporters of the federal government clandestinely worked against the Biafran regime from the inside, is strongly suggested by the timing of the declaration. Although, strictly speaking, Biafra was declared at 2 a.m. on 30th May 1967. It might as well be regarded as having occurred at the close of 29th May 1967, as at many of the significant events in the North march to political dominance in the country. The first of the North pogroms against the Igbos had occurred on the 29th May 1966, and the two which followed had been carried out on the 29th of the month. In 1962, it was on 29th May that the state of emergency was declared in the Western region, when that region came under Northern military occupation. And it was on 29th September 1967 that Enugu, the political capital of Biafra, fell to the Federal Army. Even pre-independence in 1957, the final constitutional conference had taken place on 29th September. A careful study of other key events in Nigeria's political history will highlight the recurrence of the 29th day of the month, if not 29th May itself. The significance of 29th of May is to be found in the imperial struggles between the two faiths, Islam and Christianity, and specifically in the fall on Tuesday, 29th May, 1443, of the then capital of the Christian Roman Empire, Constantinople, to the forces of Islam, led by Sultan Mehmet II. The 29th of May, therefore, appears to deeply symbolic day for the Islamic North. See? 29th May 29th May is the date of conquer, or is the significant day for the Islamic jihadists. 29th May is Democracy Day in Nigeria, 29th May. Anyway, let us continue. International oil politics. That colonial empires had ceased to be politically acceptable in the New World Order did not mean that the economic benefit from the former colonial territories were to be forsaken. On the contrary, post-war reconstruction imperatives in Europe meant that the economics of colonization was more crucial than even before. Access to crude oil, in particular, was vital. So, the announcement of the discovery of oil in Nigeria. Remember that, okay, I'll read it. Although, as we have seen, the search for oil had started in southern Nigeria as far back as 1906, and production had begun in 1908. It was only on 15th January 1956, in the last years of colonial rule, that it was announced that oil had been discovered in merchantable quantity in the Niger Delta area. The announcement would change Nigerian economics and politics forever. On 30th April 1956, Shell Darcy Petroleum Development Company changed its name to Shell British Petroleum Development Company. The importance of Nigeria's oil to Britain came into clear focus with the outbreak of new round of war between the Arabs and the Israelis in the Six-Day War in early June 1967, just weeks before the first shots were fired in the Biafran War. Virtually all the Midwest oil, a third but a growing proportion of the total production, was shipped out through the Bonny Terminal in the east via the Trans-Niger pipeline. The Federation's only oil refinery near Port Harcourt was also under the Biafran control. Therefore, any sanction imposed by the Nigerian government against Ojukwu was bound to boomerang on Lagos. This helps to explain why oil shipments were exempted from the general blockade of Biafra. During the month of June, while Shell BP was trying to nose its way out of its its nasty dilemma, the oil companies' principal interest was to keep the oil flowing, protect their multi-million pound installations, pay their dues, and offend neither side. Britain had been accused of aiding the Israelis, and the Wilson government, already struggling with economic crisis, was thrown into further crisis as Arab states combined to close the Suez Canal and cut off its oil supplies. The economic consequences of this June week were extremely serious for Britain. The closure of the canal alone, it was authoritatively estimated, was costing Britain £20 million a month on our balance of payments. No less serious was the loss of Middle East oil. We had to seek to replace this from other areas at higher price and, in the main, at much higher freights. Supplies from Libya, the one source west of the canal, were cut for a time, nor could we make up any substantial part of the loss from Nigeria, our other short-haul source. Within weeks, the civil war there cut off all our Nigerian supplies too. We had to shop for supplies in the US and Latin America at high cost, high freight, and in competition with other hard-hit countries. We had many anxieties for the following winter. Preserve the legacy of Berlin. Against this background, the British position on Biafra's attempt to secede with all the oil which they had found was never going to be neutral. Any hope for a peaceful resolution of the standoff between the federal government and the Biafrans evaporated with this Arab-Israeli war. Any embarrassment on the part of the Wilson government over the fact that even as the drums of war against Biafra were being beaten, the same government was resisting calls for a military response to white Rhodesia's own secession in November 1965, or at least an economic blockade, made no difference. Energy security apart, there was the other imperative of preserving the legacy of the Berlin Conference in defiance of the windows of change. A dominant ethnic groups with a distinct language, logic of a Biafra was otherwise inarguable, by the way. So they said, with a population of 15 million, a dominant ethnic group with a distinct language, with oil in abundance, it was a viable independent state. Biafra would have been the true independent African country. And British would not have it. Because they would have been so rich. They would be like, they will have the military, they have the oil, they have the sea, they have everything. They would have been the truly independent country in Africa. The one that would possibly be giving terms and conditions to the British, Americans, all of these world powers. No, they won't let that happen. That was not going to happen. No, it wasn't going to happen. So, the Igbo people's political case, having been slaughtered in great numbers in the north, was as legitimate as those of the Jews in Nazi Germany. Indeed, more so because theirs was not an appeal for the creation of a homeland, but for a release from an involuntary political union. Further, Southern Cameroons had been released from the same political union by a referendum, while Eastern Nigeria was to be locked into the union by a full blown war. The Organization for African Unity, OAU, had been established in 1963 to preserve the integrity of the African states, which had been forged through the Berlin Conference principles. Before this, in 1949, the British Commonwealth had been established effectively as a holding station for former British colonies as they left the Europe. In reality, it was empire-like, operating under a more inclusive brand. You know something? We currently still have about 40 pages to go. That means I could only do just about 15 to 20 pages in the last hour. So I think we should open the line. Let's open the line and have a chat. I will finish the book tomorrow. We have 44 pages to go. So I could only manage to get us down to 263. All right, I'm just going to be reading faster. So let's enjoy it. Let's have a chat around it, okay? So the next thing now is going to be the British parliamentary debate on Biafra, okay? So thank you so much for this and for hearing and participating so far. So I want to quickly ask us as well. Let's see. I'm going to open the line. Okay, I'm going to open the line. And we can have a chat for the next hour, just the next 1 hour or 50 minutes, of course. So while I also take my break. So, Unasiam, we have found ourselves here, and we can all see how we got here. There's a part of that book. You see, this book is so extensive that it also covered the return to democracy, the Chibok girls, the kidnapping of the Chibok girls, the influx of the Fulani, the second phase of the influx of the Fulani terrorists to the southern part of Nigeria, the renewal of Uthman Danfodio's jihad is inside this book. We'll finish it tomorrow. Okay? We will. So thank you so much for your time. And let me just take a bit of a stretch break, okay? So if you are, and then when I get back, I'll take calls, okay? You can react to this if you want. And if you don't want to, right, that's all right too.
My name is Nnamdi, and the reason why we're here today is to protest the killing of innocent women and children, and men for that matter, all over Nigeria, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. We are not happy, we are not pleased with what is happening, and that is why we're here today. As you can see, there are a lot of Nigerians who are protesting about the killing of families, people who are determined to tear the country apart violently, and it is not something that we support. It is not something that we would like to see continue, and we are here today to send a clear message to the Nigerian government, to the High Commissioner, that what is happening in the country is unacceptable, and we cannot accept it. If that continues, it will lead to the violent disintegration of the country. There will be no more Nigeria for anyone to go to. There will be no Nigeria for anyone to refer to. In fact, what is happening in Somalia today will be like a tea party. So we cannot allow this nonsense to continue. Something has to be done. And the consequences of the actions of terrorism in Nigeria must be driven home to the people, so that even the terrorists themselves will be able to understand that there is no mileage in where they're going. The only thing they can accomplish is the breakup of Nigeria. If they think that they can cower people, if they think they can force people to be coerced into a religion which is not theirs, then they are clearly mistaken. We are asking for peace, we are asking for people to get together, we are asking for everybody who loves Nigeria, who is associated with that country, to please prevail upon terrorism in Nigeria so we can bring it to an end. That is why a multitude of Nigerians are gathered here today. Those of us in the UK are determined to work with the government for peace. We are determined to work with the international community for peace. The one thing we cannot stomach is a repeat of 1966. What is happening today in Nigeria was the reason why Nigeria fought a bitter civil war for 3 years between 1967 and 1970. If this continues, there will be another civil war in Nigeria. And this time around, no place will be safe in Nigeria. This time around, nobody will be safe in Nigeria. So it is imperative that everybody who has the interest of the country at heart acts now and immediately to stop this nonsense from continuing.
Thank you, Jerry. Mazi. So we'll continue to put that, I will continue to show you that no matter what the propaganda that the entire system, propaganda didn't start now, it's always been there, all right? And that's why you have to understand what it means when we talk about the establishment. The establishment is these guys you are seeing, right? All these criminals in charge who have the agenda of perpetuating this kind of feudalism on all of us. So if you dare try to say no to it, they will charge you for treason, or they will even attempt to kill you, or they will kill you. So we have seen that happen many times, and indeed, there'll be, there'll be a lot of us that none of this will really deter us. Okay, it is so important that we continue to put this out there, so that when you want to argue around these contraptions and all of the lies we have been told and we were made to believe and even live, an enlightened mind will never be an easy prey for the rogues. So thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. Okay, I am going to see you later this evening. You all have a wonderful morning.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun #1.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun #1.
Maiyegun ti dé o, ọ̀rẹ́ ará ìlú.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun #1.
Lórí Facebook, lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun #1.
Gbogbo bó ṣe ń lọ ni Maiyegun já wa sí.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun #1.
àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
bó bá ṣe eré àní Maiyegun máa wí.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
ó sì tún ṣe eré wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
Maiyegun Diary diary politico.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Maiyegun.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o kẹgọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
àní Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ tó dódòdó.
Maiyegun Diary na he be number one.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé. Maiyegun ti dé.
ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
lórí Facebook.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
bọ́ bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
jíjó ìgbádìyẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
pẹ̀sìdó bá rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
kí gómìnà gbowó jẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
ọlọ́pàá tí ń gba rìbá.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé. gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀ wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò bẹ́ẹ̀ oníkanṣá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o àyè.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
ha kì máa yí ṣeré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣẹ̀fẹ̀ kì máa yí ṣeré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣẹ̀fẹ̀ ẹni bá ti lè lẹ́bọ̀ lẹ́rù o ọmọ bá dèrò kàṣàyè tú wọn síta.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
tẹnitẹni ọmọ Maiyegun ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni mo fọlọ́hún sọ ẹ̀ bá kìlẹ́bù lóòótọ́ olódodo ìlú ọ̀tá ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni ìwọ ṣá máa ń ṣọ́ra kò sì mọ́ bẹ̀rù bọ́tà ń lè rí bóníṣègùn lé káwọn mọ̀mọ́ fi ṣera wọn ni ó ti dẹrùn tí wọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ sì mọ́ bẹ̀. èèpo ọ̀bọ̀lọmọ bá dérò tàjẹ́ ò gbọ́dọ̀ jẹ́ ó ti dọba lórí àbínú ẹni kò sì mọ́ fòyà àìsíwọ́lu ní ẹnìkẹ́ ìgbódì ẹyin lábàrá o ó kó ẹni tó bá dán o àkàmù Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì o. Ẹni bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò òní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ̀rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.